Closed systems contain all paradoxes, and the rules of the system apply to the system. But systems are separated. And so I'd rather talk about what I call universes of discourse, or universes, and how members of universes might interact with each other. So I'm going to put objects in my universe. I'm going to put resonances in it. I'm going to put discords in it because I have to be true to the way it is. And I'm going to put this thing called chi. And chi is something undeterminable. And there can be more than one object. But resonances always appear in two places. So this is my minimum sized universe so far. So since systems apply to themselves, I can have, and so system is both a part of the paradox or one of the operating parameters, and it also encompasses all of the attributes that type 1 and type 2 have. So system allows types, compatible types, to relate to each other, and you can notice type compatibility that is markedly increased when both types are in agreement with system. So aliens have high compatibility with system or universe, and also bring out features that show just how far we can go in the future. But they use this notion, or some of them use this notion of type compatibility, and knowing when their two types are compatible with each other, because their existence is predicated on them having some separation. So there being some existence that is beyond the one that we normally live in. So we're a developing species, and we're mostly of, did I spell it T-Y-P-E? Yeah. So we are mostly of the type that just sees system, and they see the intersection of the system, and then they just see self. But for other to exist, then you could easily see that people in your environment are part of the intersection of self and system. But that's trivial, and it doesn't get your soul very far. So you need a perspective that uses types. Hello? Oh, not right now, Dad. Dad, can we do it tomorrow? What? I wanted to do it early. Okay. Bye, Dad. Types have the property that types can be types of types. So if you're going to base yourself on types, you need to recognize that types on their own needs either types to types, or it needs something like a universe or a system that includes objects. Something like that. Let's see, I lost the perspective again. But we should also say that our system does not just contain any possible object. Our system must have, well, it has them, operators. And operators can either bring out behavior or they can lower the behavior of a system. Information can be lost. Yeah, our system has to have constraints. I mean, things that constrict it in some way. It's strange, but the paradoxes seem to be good constraints. Here it's constraining, here it's constraining, here it's constraining. If I used system as part of system, and that's type, that's types of types. So maybe if we combining paradoxes is what I've done here. System is a part of system. That's a paradox. System interacts with self, which is of a type 1, and other of type 2. And this rule for system gives us this nice little relationship that it gets this entire region from system just by combining the paradoxes, and this is part of system. I love this idea of combining paradoxes. But what do I do if paradoxes don't line up? If there's discord in the system, then we might have a delta in the middle, a place where the paradoxes don't apply, and then it cascades through system. But system, and so we have system having identified discords, and I'm back to, sounds like the excluded middle. And so type 1 and type 2 would be incompatible in terms of system. And by system I mean reality, the internal system, any universe you're dealing with. Oh, my universe has the attribute of multiple universes, but this result might be obtained by just considering the resonance. Actually, I should say systems contain systems. So my system has system. I could say it has systems, but that just implies there's system in two places. That's covered by resonance. System, where the interaction between two systems is not a system. But I said systems can be subdivided. So now I have to think about where I seem to be dealing with just sets. This is a set paradox. So I will draw a circle around it indicating it is confined to a set. The notions involving sets. This here looks like set, contain, it's a container, but it's an area. So it's not a set. I'm not in the strictest sense. So I think what I'm doing is I'm applying the excluded middle to paradoxes. But that seems to be able to give me system separated from discord. So if you can update system with the information given from these two overlapping types in system, then you may be able to resolve that discord. I should say system does not change. No, system definitely changes the compatibility of types when they overlap. But system T1 and T2 are part of system. I hate this. It just goes down. It goes down straight to making sense. But we'll say T1 and T2 have the resolve of right there having resonance. So you could think of it as this little section is the way that type 1 and type 2 define themselves outside of system. System doesn't. So devil's advocate, if we have that intersection, look the right, devil's advocate. But I'm assuming system can contradict itself. And I like that stance. So I think this leads to 3 separate circles. Now I need to figure out what happens if alpha engulfs system. If resonance engulfs all things, system has to have, I just want the basics in system. I'm going to write resonance does and does not apply to system. Resonances take identical objects to themselves. Discords delta doesn't equal delta and delta equals delta are possible. And for infinite size sets of discord, it's an extremely rare case for delta to equal delta. In physics, we call this discord entropy. A point I want to make, when I do resonance theory, I try to always pay attention to the different resonances. Like right here I have chi1 alpha doesn't equal chi2 alpha. That could easily be chi2 over here and chi1. And I call these visual relationships. The fact that there's no visual way to discern the difference between the two statements, the statements must be equivalent because I am interpreting what I see on the paper. So, and respect the mirror. That is, if you're doing gray diagrams, respect the arrangements of your points and lines in a way that preserves symmetry in a mirror. So when you take an object and you mirror it with itself, then that results in the same object. If you can do that, then you're probably on the right track, because most things in reality have isomers, isometric forms. So, and these preserve relationships in the mirror. So you want to preserve isometries. That is not its mirror. I've really been wondering about what happens if we restrict our mirror. Oops. Looks like my bowling pin missed the mark. My bowling ball missed the mark here. I don't really see a reasonable way to go from this diagram to this diagram. Except if you had a mirror that could only act on an edge. You can call them points of mere disrespect. But I can think of the difference between this here and this here, I think, as 2 different crystallization patterns of the same compound. And when they occur, they tend to occur based on having similar structures around them, similar crystals, the same pattern, and they tend to come weighted one form to another. Now, This one is more stable. It's more stable because it's contained in two ways. But this one could be interesting. I think it might have another one on top. Oh, it's a hexagon. Oh, I think the simplest answer is this diagram. And I guess we could call this covalent. Covalent. Because it's a shared component between the two different building blocks for the crystal. So it's covalent around that edge. And for that pattern, we might also call, whoops, I'll draw it sideways. Or this is a shared point, ionic. I shouldn't call them ionic. Well, it's like ionic is one form. The other is inverse, invertible. And expect the flow of energy to resonate back and forth in an ionic bond. No. It oscillates back and forth. And with this one, it stays static. So I'm trying to describe the flow for an ionic bond in a mathematical way, and I think this notation works good. This notation, where the arrows spin back and forth as flow moves in a resonant pattern between both sides of the two diagrams stuck together. Strangest and shortest result. I'm going to assume that the form with all twos is more stable, and the form with ones on its perimeter. So this is more likely to form this compound than this, because it's less stable with this figure. But this figure could also resonate. If it were generated from this figure would have resonances. No, it wouldn't. I was going to say it would flip between 2 and 1, 1 and 2. But you can't do that because that's what we got from this figure. Okay. The system can be a part of any paradox. I should include this paradox in system. Maybe I can create a rule in system that allows paradoxes to devolve. So if I'm in system and I take my paradox of system as one of the circles, then system could break down to this, but I took away system. That doesn't mean I lost types, because no, I included types in system. So the argument is taking away system does not affect types. And when two types overlap, then we have type compatibility, or we don't have type compatibility. So system is going to have two possible crystallizations. This one, where they still overlap, and this one, where they separate. There is some process by which I can go from overlapping to separated, and from separated to none. But having no circles is a singularity in the world of circles. It's where the rules of circles break down. But we can't just delete objects. So the circle's contents, if we deleted one circle, I'm running out of room, what does deletion do to objects? They turn to entropy in system. We don't want all that entropy in system. So if I made this entire circle delta, And here, I like this little paradox. Discord stands on the outside, and Discord stands on the inside. That's terrible to put in system. I do like this one, and that is chi. Chi can be a container, or chi can be the contained. But if we can show that chi equals chi, or that system envelops chi, then chi is contained. That is to say, chi is restricted to some space, or it's a proper set by system. Here's the intersection of two objects in the system of types. Here's two objects in resonance, and I need to indicate some movement, so I'm gonna put a back and forth arrow there. So right now I'm checking that my system is consistent, and my system has built-in inconsistency, and that's discord. And systems can have discord between components. But in terms of these types here, the only reasonable scenario is for epsilon to fully separate with epsilon. So I pump some discord into the system, and it forces them apart. And it seems like this discord would force resonance, which has this back and forth movement, to be strained in one direction. And I'll use double arrow for that. By double arrow, I mean that it is, because this is back and forth movement, so that might be interpreted as increasing that movement. So one head of the arrow pulls them apart, while the other pushes them back together. And here I wanted back and forth movement. So I'm going to go with my old haunt. Arrow over, arrow under. And this is good for objects because objects are unique. And as one of the assisting factors in their uniqueness, or one of the tricks I'm trying to play with their uniqueness, is by doing it at different times. So whatever it passes over happens, and then it goes back in the other direction. So an object never has itself or anything in it that can be duplicated. Objects are distinct. I want to go. You know what else my universe needs? And I think this has to be stated. Composition. This is the earliest point at which you can find containment with 3 lines connected to dots. And this paradox is our first instance of a container. I really didn't need to include this in system. I could just included this and a dot. But I really wanted this to be in system. See, because I want arrangement. But that contradicts what I included in system over here, where arrangement breaks down That is, assuming all arrangements are identical or worth considering, then the dot could be on the inside or it could move to the outside. I don't want dot to commute outside, but if dot moves from the outside to the inside, you have the problem, the discord of figuring out whether it's possible to get dot on the outside from dot on the inside. And this is loosely resonant with the problem, I'll fit it right here. And these are the same problem. A discrete system should allow me to ignore the location of the object. Thus, for a discrete system, I would expect myself to be able to pull the point out of the center, and I'm guessing by the line. So the line undergoes the process of flipping it out. And if the line is invertible, discrete, and continuous, then we would have, so the dot moves to the outside, and then it undergoes the inversion, which brings it back to the inside. But here I see that our dot is constrained by the fact it is on the inside of something versus the outside. And probably the most interesting thing I find here is that from the perspective of a system, so either if I put, worst case scenario, if I put discord on the inside and the outside, then that maps to, so even if my inside and outside delta discords are, so even if the discords have the same type, so if these discords have the same type, then they aren't entropy from system, yet they're contained. Now the discords themselves are unknowable to system, and the discords are liable to change because they're inherently discordic when you move it to the inside of the triangle, which once again increases the entropy to system. Now system has to now it has to interact with another system in order to figure out what this diagram relates to. And that system is the human. Alien joke. My intuition tells me that moving it out puts it into a higher discord space. And so when you move it back in, it's more likely to have picked up instances from its interactions that make it so that when you put it back in, it's inherently more chaotic. And it's going to crystallize to the lowest energy state. Here it's free to go anywhere within the confines of this paper, and in here it has lower energy. And by energy, I'm referring to its freedom to move about. So we want our system to function. We want our universe. I hypothesize that the reduction in energy is inherent to forming resonance. So I think it's by resonance that this object will choose the form where it is constrained. Of course, there is the case, I see the case, that it's still closer, but that is a rare case compared to the containment. Because if I sprawl out this paper to infinity, the chances that that dot is going to land in a place that brings it closer are tiny compared to the expanse. So that would be what we would have to consider if we were taking, which we are taking, area, so to speak, into consideration. But if we can get dot out to some object epsilon, and then epsilon is passed back into triangle, then triangle can learn to recognize that epsilon. And when passed back and forth, builds resonance. Or I could have my objects pass objects. I almost forgot objects are distinct. So if everything is in a world of being distinct, and epsilon passes epsilon to epsilon, and then it passes some epsilon back. And these are all distinct entities. And these two epsilon, this one would have to be a collection of, it would have to be a circle. So this epsilon would be a circle, and these two, okay, so clearly some epsilon is taking another epsilon. So there's an epsilon being passed to an epsilon. So that epsilon, it becomes part of that epsilon, and then that epsilon is passed back to the inside, and that builds resonance between the two objects, one from the inside and one from the outside. This trick works with reality too, but not all things are distinct, and some things can be copied from one place to another. And when the copies are in their highest resonance, they would be indistinguishable on either side. So I need this diagram to converge to this diagram. And then that is just the same. That is resonant with, but if it's going to the point at which K gets really close to N by proportionality, but goes in the wrong direction towards infinity instead of down to 1, an edge, then there's no way for any finite epsilon that would be possible. Thus we would get, I use this little bar on the maps to symbol to indicate that this one transformed into this one, or this one was lost and then this one was created. I argue our objects should fly apart. So this has the form of a discord in the system. The objects are inherently separated, and that separation gives the resonance So from the perspective of either object, the object it was separated from becomes a discord. So this keeps the discord in system. So I think what I want to do is throw in discords at different points and verify that there's still some level of containment. So if I put a discord on the line, then it's trapped by the container. If I put a discord on the point, if I put a discord on the line, is it freed from the container? I'm asserting the inside's different than the outside, that I have a container. But having a discord on the point and the line should bring it outside of container. And at the extremes of discord, the point would be completely broken off. But it would be possible for it to be on the inside. So there it's contained again. The figure is containing the discord, and the discord is containing the figure. Okay. So bonds begin to break as the weight of the edges approaches infinity. But as k and n approach any integer, and they all share that integer in common, it's stable. I want this to edges type 1. Well, edges of type 1 share only one side in common for the entire figure. So those have to share. So they're ionic. No, I think they're covalent. And then possibly edges of type 2, which are two overlapping lines, because to generate the figure requires that two edges overlap. Then we have ionic by the argument that something is wrong. I was going to say something has to pass over here and then pass back, and that would be an electron. I'm confused. Let's try categorizing them. So ionic and covalent, and this, I speculate, would have the resonance, just to go through all the cases. So I'd expect it to fluctuate between these two different orientations of charge, and most likely this, where they're both pointing at one point, is the least stable and lead to, but these come from separate objects, but their operations could converge on the same point, and that's human math. But in the real world, actually that's a pretty good one, but sometimes our points, our different points point to delta, and delta being a discord can take on different values. So I'm wondering what happens. So I'm going to decree that these two operations taken together in the system further reduce the discord on the set of possibilities that is the delta if it's a set. And if the discord can be reduced far enough, then, so if the two sets intersect enough, then the system has the ability through the person, through some other system, to move back to the state of dot. So I'm saying that the passing of two different sets of discords to some third point only increases the discord within that point. So if we pass the discord obtained from the starting point and it travels along, then if it passed the same discord or the same type of discord to both, or it oscillated between different of the set delta, then it's possible to take the intersection of the two sets of delta and come up with a relation, an operator that gives back a set of smaller size than delta. I need to include the rule in my universe, in my system, that operators can either move something over from one collection to another, or they can make the same information available on both sides. So the question is, when do I allow cloning with operators? So an operator on a single object takes that object to some undetermined value. An operation between two objects returns a value or a set of values. So chi operating on n, the integer. N is an element of the natural numbers. But I'm going to argue that if it does produce this set, this discord, that is the set of possibilities, then if I have a second operation, that operation should reduce discord in my system by the further reduction of this set, hopefully all the way down to some particular member epsilon. All the epsilon are different. And then I could make an operation on operators, the link between operators. And this link can reduce it down to a single operation. And that operation must return a reduced set of possibilities for any three epsilon. And I'm guessing it allows for commuting. But if I want to move E2, then I need an additional operation. F of x is no different than x of f. So if the function takes some set of values, then the relationship between f and x isn't changed by the position. Thus, a unary operator can be applied to both sides. And then we start to get associative structures. I mean an ordering to the way things are applied that doesn't matter based on ones that do. And this leapfrogging allows me to combine three circles, three operators to one operation. And I would argue, since these three operators are equivalent to the single operation. Oh, and that I can write as O of, and assuming they're different, we could have O of chi1, comma, chi2, comma, chi3. I'm letting these three chi sub n be types here. If they're all the same type, the order shouldn't matter. I will connect similar types by lines, say these two are the same type. So I'm thinking chi1 and chi3 would be restricted by chi2, bringing it into higher resonance. And if chi2 is a discord, we just get two separated entities, chi1 and chi3. So I expect chi2 to be in the most advantageous position, because as my operations try to seek consistency, if chi1 and chi3 have the same type and it takes three different types, that brings, if we make chi2 the system, if we ensure it's the system, then we should get O of chi O chi. It takes O of chi operating on chi, operating with the system, and that leads to the truncation of the operation on the system. I'm guessing it would, to O of chi O chi. It brings it to a unary operation on a binary operation. Although I do think that operators like this are probably difficult to find, because as we start to take operations from, say, outside of a specific axiomatic system, it can begin to return a lot of possibilities for how those operators could evolve, assuming information is conserved. So the operators would, all of these operators, separated operators, would cause the output of possibilities higher and higher. And so when these possibilities are of the form, say, delta, so when the operation returns from the perspective of this epsilon, it returns discord, then there's really nothing that epsilon can do from within this operation to resolve its discord. And so it has to fix that entropy by having some additional information added in. One last note, taking delta taking epsilon sandwiched between two delta and an inverse discord. So there's taking this symmetric expression here with a discord that has an inverse, gives a larger reduced set of possibilities and produces 1-1 input and output and symmetry. And that would be the place for group theory. That's all.